There's so much more to it, and you're going to hear a little bit about that today because of the pioneering work that he did in welcoming Spanish-speaking people into minority enterprise, into helping them in education, helping them be counted in the census, and so much more. And we've put together an incredible panel. And the history making aspect of this is that these were the people who were there. They're the people who were participants and who came up with the initiatives, sat with the president to create them, and then to execute them. So they were the engineers, the participants of so many things that, in fact, I heard some remarks last night by the first United States Treasurer, Rosario Marin, who is here today. Please stand. Let's welcome the first. Madam Treasurer was the first Hispanic immigrant treasurer in the United States, and I thought she put it so well at a little dinner we had with our panelists last night when she thanked them for opening the doors, for creating the path through which people like her were able to achieve things that historically they would not have been able to do in America. But she attributed so much of that progress and opening to these people who worked so closely with Richard Nixon. We have a panel. That's why the chairs, and I'm going to introduce the moderator of the panel, who is Henry Ramirez. He was an incredible educator, still is, with the Whittier Union High School District, where he pioneered in efforts to bring Mexican Americans into the educational mainstream like they had never been before. And he was noted nationally, given numerous awards for that. He worked with the United States Civil Rights Commission and did extraordinary work there. He was a counselor to Presidents Nixon, Ford, and Reagan. And President Nixon, in the first part of his administration, asked him to be the first chairman of the Cabinet Committee on Opportunities for Spanish-Speaking Peoples. We're honored to have him, and he's going to introduce the panel. Please welcome Henry Ramirez. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon. Bienvenidos. On behalf of my fellow panelists and myself, we express our appreciation to the staff here of the Nixon Foundation, and we welcome you to participate today in our discussions and in the learning of history that is going to go on today. And since we only have a couple of hours in which to retrace an incredible history that the world still doesn't know, we shall begin by asking Stu Spencer to come out and take his place. Stu is the person who, in the 1950s, started the first activities of that history, to be followed by David Gonzales, who was my former student at Rancho High School and who joined Stu Spencer, to be followed by a gentleman that arrived in Washington, D.C. in 1959 after he served in the Air Force. He came from the southern part of Texas, Gigi Garcia, who will talk about the environment in Washington before the other persons arrived in the late 1960s, to be followed by Martin Castillo, the first chairman of the Cabinet Committee on Opportunities for the Spanish-speaking people, a very prominent attorney here in Southern California, to be then followed by Theresa Speake, who helped President Nixon and helped all of us implement the programs so that Hispanic people could participate in the business opportunities of our country. And then, of course, Theresa will be followed by Manuel Oliverez, who will then tell you about some of the things that for which he was responsible, that added to that history. And then the man who communicated to the world the first things that happened, and the first things that happened, and the first things that happened. Carlos Conde, a well-known writer from Houston, Texas, and myself, Henry Ramirez, who will try to keep order today in this room. Mm-hmm. So we will commence, each one having a maximum of 8 minutes, but truth be told, I know they're going to take 10. We'll start with Mr. Stu Spencer.
Thank you, Henry. I never make these tall enough. Thank you, Henry. It's not only nice to be here today with a lot of people that I worked with historically in the political process, mostly California, some in Texas, but I just want to take a minute and really thank Loie Gaunt for being here today. Loie. We used to call her Mrs. Nixon. I noticed there's a lot of young people here today, and that's a blessing, because when I look at the members of this panel and myself and the things that we've been through, we can tell you about any damn thing we want to, and you're not going to know whether it's true or not. So consequently, I'm going to really try to not be a historical revisionist and tell you as it was, or at least as I saw it in the early days of the outreach programs. I'm going to start by taking you back to the year 1950, because that was sort of the first time, if you were a political anthropologist, you'd look at the landscape and you would see that there was really no outreach being done by either political party in the state of California at that time. But in 1950, it was the year that Dick Nixon was running for the United States Senate against Helen Hagan Douglas. Earl Warren was running for re-election against Jimmy Roosevelt, Democrats' son of the President Roosevelt. And in California, we had a thing called cross-filing. Cross-filing meant that if you were a Republican, you could run in the Democrat primary without the designation Republican after your name, or vice versa. If you were a Democrat, you could run in the Republican primary. So, and I was a student at East Los Angeles Junior College at the time, and the Warren campaign, the Warren political strategists, they came up with a concept that let's take advantage of cross-filing. Let's get deeply involved in the Democratic primary in the barrio of LA, which I'll talk about a little bit later. So that community at that time was about 80% Mexican, Chicano as we called them, or they called themselves, and 90% I was contacted at that time, I'm going to East LAJC, by a man by the name of Pat Hillings, who was a successor to Nixon in the old 12th Congressional District, which was later turned to the 25th. And I was a young man involved in a lot of volunteer activities, the Young Republicans, and driving Hillings around and taking care of his laundry and all the things that you do as you start out in the process, in the political process. And Pat called me up and told me about what the Warren people wanted to do. And they had spoken with the Nixon people, so to speak, campaign organization. And he asked me if I would be willing to go in and take over this project, which would last about 6 weeks, and see if we could put a campaign together in East LA. Now, my first reaction was, why me? I mean, I'm not qualified to do this. But this is an important point about the Nixon organization. The answer I got was that I was a trusted peon in the organization. Otherwise, trust was always important in that organization, and it should be in all political organizations. So I went and met with Warren campaign people, and I basically accepted the job. And they had a caveat that was interesting. The caveat was that a percentage of the money that was spent in the budget had to come out of the Chicano community. So after accepting the job, I went back to college. I said, I know what this place is, but I don't know anything about it. I have to find somebody that knows this community, this barrio. I had a friend, fellow student, Eddie Maldonado. Now, Eddie was a street smart, I guess is the term to use. He wasn't political, but he knew the community. He knew it inside out. So I explained the project to Eddie. I said, hey, I would like to get involved. I need your help because I don't know the community, et cetera, et cetera. And he just kept looking at me. And finally I said, $500 in it for you, Eddie? And I got it. So I explained the requirements, the money requirement to him. I said, who in the community can come up with either seed money or help us raise it? He says, give me a day, let me think about it. 2 days later, he came back, and he says, you and I have a lunch with a gentleman by the name of Armando Torres. Now, Armando Torres was a wholesale grocery business. I think it was Spartan Grocery, is that right, Frankie? And he had money, there was no doubt about it. So we explained the campaign concept to Armando. He accepted the responsibility, and he went out and formed a small committee of other fellow Chicanos with Dr. Carrion, which is a famous name in that community, Consuelo de Banza, Frankie Vega, who's in the front row. His father was on that committee, and there was others who I can't remember today. But the basics are, here's what the campaign consisted of. The first outreach campaign by a Republican candidate, in this case two, Warren and Nixon. Very simple. We put a headquarters in on First Street, next to the karaoke bar. That was a mistake. The karaoke bar was a union hangout. After work, they all came, drank beer at the karaoke bar, came out the front door of the bar. There's a big picture of Warren in a plate glass window. They throw a brick through it. So Armando Torres, after a while, one day got me aside. He says, Spencer, he says, do all campaigns spend this much money on plate glass? I said, I don't know. I'm new at it, Armando. We'll find out later. We had the appearance of the governor, Warren. He came to the headquarters opening, and he came to a reception at somebody's home, someplace in the district. I don't remember where. We sniped the district at night with signs of both Warren and Nixon's. And we had a sound truck that spent about 2 hours a day traveling the area, promoting the two candidates in Spanish. Now, this is a bare necessities campaign by today's standards. There was no mail, there was no radio, there was no television. It was just those small actions, so to speak. Now, the area that I'm describing, the barrio, if you know it, Atlantic on the east, Whittier Boulevard in the south, the LA River on the west, and let's say the Monterey Hills on the north. The area was about 80% Hispanic then, and 90% Democratic. And in the end, Warren received 25% of the vote. And I don't frankly remember what percentage Nixon got, but it was probably a little less because he was down ticket to a degree. But the project was deemed very, very successful by both campaigns, Warren and Nixon. And of course, it was Nixon's first statewide win, and it was sort of his launching pad to the next goal that he had in his life. Now, there was no follow-up in the party apparatus in the years 51, 52, 53 to what we tried to do in 1950. But in 1952, Nixon was selected as the running mate for Eisenhower, and they went on and won the election. And it's at this time and point in history, sort of the beginning of what I call the domination of the Republican Party in California by Richard Nixon. And that lasted for 10, almost 15 years. And I'll tell you, that domination was thorough, workmanlike, in every way, and I will explain some of it to you. Because his first step was to take control of the party apparatus, the Republican Party apparatus. He named the state chairman. He saw that the state committee members that were appointed were Nixonites, as we would call them. He concerned himself and his people with who is the county chairman in at least the 43 major counties in the state. And then he also had us and other people find candidates to run for the county committee who were, again, Nixonites. So he was basically reaching out to dominate his own party here in California. And he basically achieved that goal when he ran for re-election with Ike in 1956. And after the 1956 election, a meeting was held, a post-mortem meeting by the Nixon campaign people. And at this meeting were some of his best operatives. I was not there. Some of his campaign people, best operatives, and a whole group of young Republican congressmen like Joe Hope, Pat Hillings, Glenn Lipscomb, Craig Hosmer, Bob Wilson, H. Allen Smith, and politicals like Murray Chotiner, Bernie Brennan, and Herb Klein. And the meeting was chaired by Bob Finch. Now, all the aspects of the 1956 campaign were discussed, and of course the future of Dick Nixon was discussed, but also, and where I was involved, the future of the party in the state of California. So down in that meeting, under, let's say, the category of the future of the party in California, Pat Hillings brought up the idea and reminded them that in 1950, we had an East LA experiment, as they called it. And he raised the idea that there was a potential here in that community that we should pursue, the party and the Republicans and Nixon, where we should pursue strategies and tactics to encourage Chicanos to at least take a look at the candidates. And the conclusion was, they agreed, and the conclusion was that the vehicle that they would use at that time was the county party organization in Los Angeles. Now, the next year and a half was spent selling this concept because we had other powers. We had finance guys downtown. We had other thought leaders in the community who didn't think practically, tactically, or politically. We called them in those days the downtown crowd. And let me tell you who they were. They were the LA Times. It was owned by the Chandlers. It was some of the oil companies, Signal, Union. There were insurance companies, Pacific Mutual, Asa Call, bankers. All these were the people. Ad hoc committee of 30. They called the shots in LA. They decided who was going to be police chief, who was going to be mayor, who was going to be on the city council. And they were powerful. And in the main, they did good work for the city of Los Angeles. But they didn't understand the word outreach. So it was a tough sell. Now, the committee that set the tone for you, the committee of 30, they lived in Pasadena, they lived in San Marino. When they went to work, they didn't have to even drive through East LA. They came on the Arroyo Seca Freeway. And we were also about a decade removed from Sleepy Lagoon in the Pachuca Wars. Now, I say that because historically, that was the mindset of these people in the downtown crowd. They didn't know what was in East LA, and they were being asked to pony up money to make an outreach to this. Well, there were a sufficient number of Nixon people on that committee, thank God, that they agreed, and they put money forward, earmarked money for outreach for the Republican Party in LA County. So that was a big step forward. Now, nothing ever goes smoothly. We had other problems, internal problems. We had a senator from, we used to call him Senator from Formosa. It was Senator Bill Nolan. We had a governor named Goody Knight, Republicans. And Senator Nolan and Dick Nixon, in many ways, were on a collision path. They both wanted to be president of the United States someday. So there's an old axiom in politics: if you're running for president, you better have a solid favorite son position before you go to the rest of the nation. Nolan didn't have that. And of course, now Dick Nixon did. But because of these internal battles that were going on, Bill Nolan announcing he's going to come home and run, not for re-election, he's going to run for the governorship, because he wanted to use it as a platform to go for the presidency. This was a surprise to Goody Knight, the sitting governor, so what am I going to do? So we had to hear, a lot of conversations went back and forth above my pay grade at the time. But the end result was Bill Nolan ran for governor, Goody ran for the Senate seat, Nixon sat in the sidelines and watched them destroy each other. And we lost in 1958 because musical chairs don't work in the game of politics, and you can't run in California on the right to work, which Bill Nolan did. So, with Nolan and Knight running statewide, realizing that Nixon controlled the operation or controlled the party apparatus, they were looking for friends. And they had to turn to this gentleman for his friends. And so Nixon made a very, very fast strategic move at that time that involved outreach. Number one, he named a new LA County chairman. He named my former partner, Bill Roberts, and myself as the staff people of the county committee. Bill was executive director, I was field director. And the message, our liaison to the operation was Bob Finch. And so Finch comes to us and told us we had to do this. But with it, sort of this empowerment they were giving us came a very, very direct directive. And that was to revisit the Chicano question and find ways to reach out and be inclusive. So my partner and I, Bill Roberts, we thought about that a great deal. We said, how do we do this? Finally, the answer that came to us was, let's don't screw around. Let's be bold. So we went out and we established the Republican Community Service Center right in the middle of the barrio. We named a director by the name of Raul Bernal, who was a very savvy street guy, not a political guy, but he knew the community well. We stayed open 7 days a week. We brought services to the area such as free polio shots, and we brought young lawyers in from the downtown law firms who could counsel some of the people who lived in the area if they had immigration problems, things of that nature. If they had a real legal problem, he'd refer them to a local lawyer. We helped raise money for the East Side Boys and Girls Club, and we held work fairs. Otherwise, employers would come to our Republican Service Center, get a desk, people could come in, they had jobs available, they'd be interviewed, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We made a requirement of the business that came that if you got a chair or a desk in the headquarters, every time you interviewed a bunch of people, you had to hire 2 people. You can't just come here and talk, put on a show. You got to hire somebody. And it worked. We also held seminars on health care and things like how does a teenager qualify for scholarships and all of those sort of things that are important. And also, while this is going on, Bill and my partner and I were on the outlook for candidates. We were trying to recruit Chicano candidates to run for public office. Tried to recruit Henry here. He was too smart. He didn't run. But generally speaking, on the whole terms, the Community Service Center was simply one. The Nixon Republican Party at the time was saying to the community, you got a problem, you come and see us, we'll try to help you. And I'd like to stand here today and say that the Community Service Center was a roaring success. Well, it really wasn't, but it was a tremendous step forward. And the real test came is when the election was over in the fall, in November, as to whether that service center was still there. Because that whole community was sitting back and laughing and smiling and said, the day the election's over, we're never going to see him again. We stayed. We were there. And we got brownie points for it. We got a lot of good comments out of that, so we stayed. So things are looking good in terms of outreach into this part of the city. And a catastrophe hit us. At the Biltmore Hotel in LA in the 1960s, the Democrats nominated a young, attractive, charismatic Catholic. The east side of LA fell in love with John Kennedy. You could not go into a barbershop, a small bar, a mom and pop store. There wasn't a picture of John F. Kennedy on the wall. That's pretty tough to overcome. So as we all know, Nixon lost the election, thanks to Cook County, Illinois. And a new county chairman came in who didn't share the outreach philosophy of the Nixon organization, and he was elected. And then after the defeat of Nixon in 60, the party in California, something set in which I'm going to call it, I'm creating a new word, Goldwateritis. There were people, and I sensed it early on. They supported Nixon in 60, they voted for Nixon in 60, but after he got defeated, they felt like, oh boy, now we can go get Goldwater. It was a sensation to a politician who grew up in the Nixon School of Politics. They did not share the same ideals of outreach. Their concepts were nothing pragmatic involved. And of course, the platform that he ran on, Goldwater, was basically an anti-communist platform, which was Nixon's big game anyway. He was the guy who was on the House Activities Committee, and he was the person all the heat from the Eastern press and everybody because he was too hard on certain members who were alleged communists and so forth. But the point is, outreach was not at the top of the agenda. It wasn't the second thing in the agenda with this new group that came in. They were preaching the gospel of anti-communism. Nixon had been preaching the gospel of anti-communism and outreach, two of them together. Now, all the downers being said, I think if we'd had a county chairman then who would have stayed back, taken the heat, stayed the course, I think at the end of the day, the Republican Party in California would have taken a really giant step forward in outreach. Because this new chairman basically closed the East LA Republican Service Center, and the party continued a lot of activities after that, but nothing that was conducted in the manner of a shared partnership with this community. And that was sort of the key to a good outreach program. You've got to make the people you're reaching out to shared partners in the effort. The new chairman didn't understand that. But in 1960, or later than 60, early 60s, mid-60s, They elected a new state chairman by the name of Dennis Carpenter. He was a lawyer from Orange County. He was an ex-FBI agent, and he spoke very fluent Spanish. And he shared these concepts of outreach. So one of his first steps was to hire David Gonzales, who you're going to hear from today, who became a statewide coordinator and was one of the real implementers of outreach programs after that for the Republican Party. So let me leave you with a thought. The Nixon organization started thinking outreach in 1950, and it became a part of their belief system, and it sort of became ingrained in the body politic of the era. Both parties. Now, you can ask the question fairly, why did he do this? Well, number one, I personally believe that he was like me. He grew up in California. He went to school with Chicanos. He adopted some of their cultures. We played ball. We played with Chicanos. We played against Chicanos. We were all one big Southern California. Now, we had fights. Yes, we had fights. So it was sort of in his DNA, being a Southern California boy from Yorba Linda, to understand something about the Hispanic culture. And the second thing was tactically, and he was a good tactician. If you were looking at the future and the votes and where they were going to come from, we'd already gone through the migration of Euro-Americans from the Midwest and everywhere. You know, they were coming in 1 million a year in the 40s from the Midwest in the 50s. Every year, 1 million of them came in. And it wasn't that big a migration from Mexico at that time. If you looked at it tactically, where is the future going to be? You'd have to say, it's going to be south of the border. It's going to be south of the border. So let's get involved. Let's get into the outreach, that sort of thing. And it's ironic, because as we stand here today, there are more Mexicans in L.A., any city in the world except Mexico City. And that's what was in his mind and other politicians' mind in the 50s and 60s, when they knew that this growth somehow, somewhere was going to come. So that's it. Thank you. Do I turn it over to...
Thank you, Stu, for that introduction into the history of a man that changed the world in so many ways. And following up the work that Stu did, here's the man that ran the campaign to elect Ronald Reagan president, ran the campaign to elect Ronald Reagan governor, campaign to elect Richard Nixon president. And he was there at the very beginning when our young men had come back from Second World War, had gone to school, gone to college, and were now ready to take their places in American society. And so we have a young man whose father was one of those veterans and who stepped in there to follow up on the work that Stu has started. David, please tell us about that part.
Well, I thought about what I was going to say here today, and one of the questions that I get asked a lot is, how did you get involved politically? And there was a young man that I had met by the name of Frank Vega who brought me into a campaign that I knew nothing about. It was in East LA. We were working for a candidate at the time by the name of Villarosco that was running for Congress. Didn't know what the heck I was doing, tell you the truth, But we managed to pull 35% out of a predominantly Democratic community for a Republican candidate. That caught the attention of a gentleman by the name of Dennis Carpenter, who at the time was the vice chairman of the Republican Party, who the following year became the chairman, and who hired me on to do outreach for the Hispanic community. Some of that outreach were cocktail parties. We went to Democratic organizations that we knew weren't going to necessarily vote for our candidates, but we wanted to we took the battle to them. We went to organizations like MAPA, Mexican American Political Association, and other organizations. We went to city council where a group of us, like Frank and some other gentlemen, knew city councilmen, and we befriended them and went out and told our story. There was no better time that I can remember, and I've been involved politically for a long time, where two gentlemen, Dennis Carpenter and Stu Spencer, were truly committed to the outreach of capturing the Hispanic vote. And without their support, it would have been a tough uphill battle to do, because there was opposition within the Republican Party. They didn't understand the Hispanics. They didn't understand that we, as a family unit, were very conservative people. We believed strongly in our religion and our culture and our family and our country. And my dad served in the Second World War. I was second generation, and they didn't know us. And it was the things that were accomplished couldn't have happened, like I said, without the help of Stu Spencer backing it, and Frank Vega put a lot of effort into it, put together a lot of, we called a Young Turks Club, a lot of young guys out there doing the outreach for us, and Denny Carpenter definitely was very instrumental as the chairman of the Republican Party, knew the culture, knew the language, knew the people. And it was quite an experience to have, at that point in time in history, to be doing an outreach with these two gentlemen.
Thank you very much, David. At this time in history, of course, in South Texas, there was a man that had been working the fields in Michigan, Illinois, Indiana, California, Texas, with cotton, tomatoes, grapes. And he joined the Air Force when he came of age, came out of the Air Force, went back to his little town in South Texas, and realized that the world about him had grown up, and he belonged to a new world. So he packed his bag and said his farewell to his parents, to his friends, and went in 1959 to Washington, D.C., to go to Georgetown University. And because he knew Washington in 1959, 1960, before any of us ever even thought Washington would be a place of employment for us, he was there with senators and congressmen, working up in Congress, working at local newspapers. And he will tell us about the environment that he found in Washington, D.C., into which the rest of us came. So, Gigi, now's your turn.
Can I ask a question before I start?
Yes.
In the movie Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid asked, "Can I move? I can hit a target by moving better. I need the podium." I'd like to ask for a moment of silence to remember those who have gone before us, marked with the sign of faith, especially those for whom we here pray. John Barreño, Interim Chairman of the Cabinet Committee. Jose Tisol, Full Bird Colonel, U.S. Army, retired from Puerto Rico. Carlos Ruiz, Associate Director, and Mercy Hernandez, Associate Director. Thank you. One of the many forms of Mexico is the Canción Popular, better known as the Canción Ranchera. It has been developed and cultivated for over 100 years. Like the corrido, the generic form is lyrics with a narrative set to music, preferably música mariachi. The themes are love or romance, history, values like patriotism, machismo and valentía, boastful bravado, among others. In the middle of one such song, a national screen idol and popular male vocalist interjects the lines, "No pido que me den, no más que me pongan donde hay." Translated in its broadest sense, it means, I do not ask for charity, I only seek opportunities. Migrant farm workers from the Rio Grande Valley in South Texas in the early 40s and 50s were too proud, and it was a well-ordered pride, to accept government handouts. We traveled to the four winds in excess of 1,000 miles each way in search of work, rather than to stretch our hands palms up for government handouts, unemployment, food stamps, and welfare. We went north to the Midwest, Wisconsin, Michigan, Indiana, Ohio, and Illinois, west to California, Oregon to the Yakima Valley in the state of Washington, east to Florida, and even the deep south, Mississippi and Louisiana, and back to the South Texas, Rio Grande Valley. The words of the ranchera resonated in a preteen doing a man's job in the cotton fields or in el bloqueo, the blocking of sugar beets, with the infamous short hoe, of course. I heard the echo in President Richard Nixon's statement on December the 31st, 1969, establishing the Cabinet Committee on Opportunities for the Spanish-Speaking. He announced that the 1970 census of populations would, for the first time, count the Mexican, the Puerto Rican, and the Cuban heritage peoples of the United States. You see, before then, we didn't count. It was all in black and white. Chairman Martin Castillo and Dr. Henry Ramirez both are personally responsible for that major achievement. After 400 years, we were finally recognized. Cristobal Colon, for whom we celebrate this day, a native of Italy, was a Spanish speaker. He discovered America in the name of the King and Queen of Spain, Fernando and Isabella. Chairman Castillo and Dr. Ramirez were the first and the last chairman of the Cabinet Committee, the Alpha and the Omega, as it were. I am humbled by their presence here today. At this point, it is necessary to cite an entire passage from the President's statement, and I quote, "Many members of this significant minority group have been too long denied genuine and equal opportunity," said President Nixon. In signing the bill, he cited specifically employment, job training, and a real share in American business enterprise as a concern for his administration for creating equal opportunity for all Spanish-speaking Americans. I will get back to capitalism later. The purpose of the committee must be read with a dutiful respect for text in which every word counts. He said, to foster a new awareness with the government for the specific needs and concerns of this significant group, and to ensure that existing and future government programs in fact reach the Spanish-speaking people. The first was a challenge. It was difficult to overcome the inertia, the mindset that was there in the federal bureaucracy. They had a fixation with African Americans and recognizing their constitutional rights. He foresaw then what was needed for the committee to succeed: the dedication of its members, the support of government, the receptivity of private enterprise, and the proven drive and talent of the Spanish-speaking people. In rereading this statement, I was struck with what he had done. He gave us a shell, a catalyst for change, the Cabinet Committee. It would be up to us to listen for the voices from our community and to transform them to national policy for the White House and the Congress of the United States. He could have simply ordered his very able personal staff to do it, or his own cabinet officers. San se acabó. Perhaps because he knew comebacks and triumphs, the same as we. Then too, respecting our integrity and our traditions, he charted the best and most permanent way for change for us, through evolution. He wanted us involved in directing our own destiny. That was his particular genius. Anyone can do a contrast study of the status quo for Hispanics before President Nixon took office and after. The conclusion is inevitable. There has been a radical transformation of our community for the better. This, in part, has been the result of the Cabinet Committee. Hispanics today are in the news, and we are represented in every major field of endeavor, success models even. I want to say President Nixon created more executive-level positions in the federal government and in the Foreign Service than any other president, more Hispanic millionaires. But that is a task for the historian, the statistician, the PhD, poli-science majors, authors, or curators. The country knows who we are by our sheer numbers. We are projected to be even more numerous in the year 2050. Indeed, 30% of the total population, according to the Pew Research Center. We are the #1 minority, but it sure doesn't feel like it. Our most significant task today is to introduce new questions. What about capitalism? He started to do what he really wanted to do for us. That is, introduce us to capital formation, the world of stocks and bonds, and in a share of the prosperity of the marketplace. Due diligence requires for us to address other questions of the day. There's not enough time at this discussion to give a spin on, for example, immigration from the Spanish-speaking world, education, which is of paramount importance to us, healthcare, and care for our veterans. If you notice, there is no Hispanic voice in the national immigration monologue, for example. We are like sheep without a shepherd. We have no national spokesman. Our solutions need to be in the form of legislation, appropriation bills approved by both chambers of Congress and signed by the President. In the words of President Richard Nixon himself, we need a lobby. We Hispanic and Mexican Americans in particular owe a debt of gratitude to President Nixon. This man had a great mind and was a great leader. We need to tell that story. It will be easier task because Dr. Ramirez is preparing his memoirs, so we can use that to begin with. We must follow up in this discussion with a solid action. We need to meet again to firm up these and other recommendations and resolutions which flow from this forum. We could have begun to settle that debt of gratitude to the President by working with the Richard Nixon Foundation and the Presidential Library and Museum. I personally would like to see a bronze statue of the President with the 2 chairmen confirmed by the U.S. Senate to memorialize this proclivity for us Hispanics, and maybe a documentary giving our side of the story so that posterity will not hear just Watergate, Watergate. In conclusion, I challenge the majority in our community, Hispanic Democrats, to show us what they have for their voter participation. High-level appointments are commendable. They are good for the individual and even better for the appointing authority. But what about the community? Surely they are not satisfied with a special assistant to the President with 1 secretary and 1 administrative assistant. Let us not kid ourselves. That is a dog and pony show. We need institutions like the Cabinet Committee with the President's personal blessings and the budget appropriations to reflect the desired cloud. Richard Nixon will undoubtedly be remembered for Watergate, as Kennedy will be for the Bay of Pigs, and LBJ for his folding up under the anti-war student demonstrations, and Bill Clinton for Monica Lewinsky. But we Hispanics will remember Richard Nixon for defining us and empowering us. I repeat, Richard Nixon provided us with a catalyst for change, the means to power to benefit Hispanics, the Cabinet Committee. He expected us, the staff, to listen to the Hispanic voices and to develop the objective for our community, to fill the need and the concerns of Hispanics, to be consultants, as it were, to the President and Congress, and develop recommendations to national policy to benefit our community. In short, he taught us how to fish. Thank you. Did I hit the
Relax. Imagine for a second Yorba Linda, trees, rows of trees, more trees, rows of trees, lemons growing from the branches, oranges growing from the branches, of whom Gigi spoke. Richard Nixon was born here. As he grew up, a very poor man, he got to know us picking oranges, picking lemons. In that world, there's no hypocrisy. When you're at the bottom of the bottom of the bottom, human beings get to know each other quite well. And so when he was elected president, January 20th, he swore in the Bible to be a good president. And a few days later, like 3 weeks, I believe, he asked Martin Castillo to come to Washington to be in charge of those Mexicans he got to know. Martin?
Thank you.
Martin.
Well, I was a lawyer. I am a lawyer in Los Angeles, but at the time I was also. And I used to donate my services to all the Mexican-American War on Poverty foundations. And we had quite a battle going on here because the predominant effort was toward the black community. And it was a constant struggle where, you know, dogs fighting over a little bone. But they controlled the funding sources. Opal Jones and her group were downtown. And we had a Mexican guy in charge named Aragon. And when we wanted to get our foundations funded, we had to arrange to meet him in the restroom or something so he could sign it because the black guys wouldn't let us in. That was the kind of competition. So they came to feel that we were racist, I guess, but we were just highly competitive. And, you know, if you're trying to knock me down, we try to knock you down, that kind of stuff. So we did it, and I was used to it. My dad was a career Army guy, and he was at Omaha Beach on D-Day. I was a fighter pilot, and we're combative in nature, I suppose. But we're also very conservative with family values, very religious, very patriotic. And I was a Democrat, but in my book, we'd make ideal Republicans according to the values that Republicans continually espouse. But there's a lot of problems there. But anyhow, so I was a Democrat, and I was asked one time by Judge Leopoldo Sanchez, the first Mexican-American that was elected to office to be a judge. Later, everybody was appointed. And at the time, reapportionment was coming up, and he asked me to go up to Sacramento to lobby Jesse Unruh, who was Speaker of the House and one of the most powerful men in California. So I went up there with a couple of guys, and he said, Mr. Castillo, why should we vote to apportion a district where a Mexican-American probably be elected? I said, well, because, you know, it's supposed to be representative government, and we're a large group, and we have no representation. That's number one. And number two, you always get our vote. He looked at me, and I'll never forget this. He said, Mr. Castillo, we're always going to get your vote. And that really bothered me, because it's like the difference between courting a girl and being married to her. As long as you're in the courting stage, you do extraordinary things. I mean, you really bust yourself to do it, you know. But once you're married, it's, yeah, you know, yeah, okay, let's do that or something. You know how it goes. So I decided we had to somehow get into the courting stage, because I'm from New Mexico. We had Republicans. My dad was a lifelong Republican, although I was a Democrat. And his friends were Democrats, and so when the Republicans in, we were in. When the Democrats were in, we were in. It didn't matter who was in, we were in. Okay? My dad, by the way, he was head of LULAC there in Albuquerque. He built the first community center in Bareilles Community Center. So I came by it naturally. At any rate, I was called by Ginger Savelle, who had worked for Senator Kiko, I believe, as his head administrative assistant. And she asked me to be on a commercial for the candidate Richard Nixon. It was going to be filmed in New York. Well, I was very suspicious that the Republicans calling me. I mean, come on. So, but I agreed to go, but I wasn't going to be clever. I wasn't going to write down anything in case they got into my room and knew what the questions I was going to ask or anything. I was stupid, but that's the way I was thinking at the time. And so I went there, and there was a representative group of California, a black guy, a postman, a lawyer, a Mexican, you know, supposed to be a representative cross-section of California. Well, what happened is that I hammered the candidate for about 15, 20 minutes on Mexican-American stuff, and he loved it. I was cross-examining him because I am a lawyer, and he loved it. He was fighting back, and we were going back and forth, and we took about 20 minutes of the hour program. And I guess he liked it because I was called sometime later after he won the election by Bob Finch, who, as you remember, was the lieutenant governor of the state before he went to Washington. He had been an administrative aide for Congressman Nixon, I believe, hadn't he? And he was a very close friend of the president. So he called me and asked me to go back on the transition team. Well, I didn't know what that meant, but it sounded like a big honor, so I went. I had a big Zapata mustache. I remember I shaved it off because I wanted to come at the lowest level of acceptance. You know how that works. And so and so I got there and I stood out. He was Secretary of Health, Education, and Welfare. And so I had to wait for him. He didn't know I was coming that particular morning. I sat out there for most of the morning. I waited for him. He was in conference, and all the newspaper guys came out, and the photographers, and there was Mr. Finch. And I said, "Hi, Mr. Finch." He said, "Hello, Martin, get to work." That's all he said, and he took off. I thought he was going to embrace me and tell me how great I was for coming or something. He just said, "Get to work." I didn't know what to do. So he said, "Talk to my secretary if you need anything." So we got an office, and we got some machines. We got a secretary. And what we started doing was amassing a job bank, because I was tired of hearing, "Well, Mr. Castillo, we would hire a Mexican, but there really aren't any qualified people," you know, that kind of stuff. So we sent out the word, and we got a heck of a job bank for all kinds of professions, all kinds of PhDs. We found people under the rocks that I didn't even know existed because I was just from California. And that's what we did. Well, after that, I went back to my law practice, and I was sitting around there one day, and my secretary says, "Secretary Finch is on the phone for you." Well, by that time, he was like my hero, for crying out loud. So I went to the phone. I felt like saluting. Instead, he said, "Martin, the president wants you to come back and work for him." And I said, "I don't want to go back there. I did my job, and I'm happy, and I got a lot of stuff to do here, blah, 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 blah." He said, "Well, come out, and I want you to talk to Daniel Patrick Moynihan." He was called the Gremlin of the White House. He was a Democrat also, and the president appointed him. Because the president, above all, in my view, was a pragmatist. He wanted to get things done, and he found the best way in his mind to get them done. So Daniel Patrick Moynihan convinced me. He was wearing no shoes. His hair was all messed up. His tie was rumpled. His shirt was out. He said, "Martin, God darn it, you got to come to work because the president thinks you're the greatest thing since enchiladas." So that sold me. Compared to an enchilada, you know, what are you going to say? So I came back, and he appointed me to be chairman of the Interagency Committee on Mexican-American Affairs. Now, the Interagency Committee on Mexican-American Affairs had been started by Lyndon Johnson in 1967. And I didn't find this out till I got there. It had a shelf life of about 6 to 8 months. So I was going to be out of a job in 6 to 8 months after I'd shut down my practice, you know. So I figured something had to be done. So I went to the White House, and I told him, "I want to get a bill through Congress." And the president just said, "Well, go do it." How do you get a bill through Congress? Well, we figured out a way, and I'm sure the White House helped us, and we lobbied the Democrats, Senator Montoya, I remember Congressman Lujan. Senator Javis, the big Republican guy from New York with a constituency of Puerto Ricans, helped us a great deal. Rubikoff helped us a great deal. All the guys from Texas, most of them helped us a great deal. Senator Tower certainly did. And there was a lot of Mexicans in Chicago, Kansas City. The Cubans helped us because we changed it to Cabinet Committee on Opportunity for the Spanish Speaking. And the reason that came about is, one, we had to get it through Congress, okay? And we couldn't get it through with Mexican in the word, just Mexican. Although we were 6 to 8 million, the Puerto Ricans were 1.5 million, the Cubans were 500,000, and the others were about 1 million or 1.5 million. We were the dominant group, but we didn't have a national presence. Bob Finch pointed that out to me one day when I was riding with him. And I said, "Mr. Finch, don't you think it's a little unfair? All the dollars that go out of here for the poverty programs and for needy people, minority people, the majority goes to blacks." I said, "Why is that? That just doesn't seem fair." He says, "Well, look around you. Do you see any brown faces?" We were riding through Washington. I said, "No." He says, "Well, neither do they." So I realized we had to have a national presence. So this idea, we had to get the bill through to keep life. And we had to include the Hispanics, Spanish speaking, to get the votes. But it was also a great idea because all of a sudden we had a national presence. All of a sudden we meant something to politicians. So now the first thing to do, I suppose, and probably the greatest accomplishment that the Cabinet Committee made, Oh, by the way, we had to shape the bill, and we got it through. And we became the Cabinet Committee on Opportunity for the Spanish-Speaking, and I was the first chairman. But the next thing we had to do was we had to get some money. And the way you get money in the federal government, especially for the minority programs and everything, is by numbers. They go by numbers. Politicians do everything by the numbers, haven't you noticed? So to get numbers, we had to get into the census as a group. Well, that was pretty tricky business because, after all, Mexicans are Caucasians. A lot of people forget that, but we all know that. And in fact, it really bugs me when Mexicans says, well, those white people. I said, God damn it, you're white. Anyhow, that's another story for another day, isn't it? So we had to get into the census, and so Maurice Stans was a very nice man. He was Secretary of Commerce, and he helped us, and of course, the president was all for it. And so we met with the census people with the help of Secretary Stans. We convinced them, they believed it, they bought it. A lot of White House pressure, I must say, because it was good for everybody. And we got it through. Well, the money started coming in that way. Then our job as ombudsman was to see that the various government agencies got it out to the right places, and that's what we had our staff for. We had a bunch of bright guys, bright young guys, some of whom are here. They're still bright, but they're not so young anymore, like me. And that was our job, see? And that's what we did. And probably the quote of Carlos Conde, wherever he is, he stepped out. He says, this effort of the Cabinet Committee probably produced the greatest in equal opportunity for the longest time of any of the things that the Cabinet Committee did. And I firmly believe that, because it's still there. It's still ginning on. And a lot of people are mad at the word Hispanics. They call it a mythical term. Well, it was a political term, okay? But it worked. So the next thing that I want to talk about briefly, Theresa Speake is going to speak about NEDA, National Economic Development Association, and how it prospered under the guidance of Chairman Ramirez. But I want to tell you how it happened. And this is, again, the president didn't care how things happened. He knew what we were trying to do, and he just said, do it. And so what we did, my friend Ben Fernandez, who used to work for me, or work with me as a consultant, stole the idea from a Mexican-American CPA in Colorado to give technical assistance to Mexican-Americans to tap into the economic stream. So I stole the idea, Ben stole the idea, gave it to me. I went to Hilario Sandoval from Texas, who was head of the SBA and a very good friend of mine. And I told him we need to get it funded. He funded it. We got together a board of Puerto Ricans, Cubans, Mexicans. We did all the right things to give, again, national presence. We formed a board. They took off. We had 10 offices, I believe, to start with. And then Theresa and her group carried it on to bigger and better heights. Then we went on to other things, because we only had a staff of 30, I think, was something like that, was around 30. Yeah, and so we had a lot of work to do, you know. When we worked, I mean, we worked 10, 12 hours days. We worked on Saturday because we knew they were going to get us. Because the president had told me, Martin, get as much done as you can while you can. Because he knew, and I knew, that if we were just being programmatic and we were centered on one thing like that, that the politicians would get us. And they got us, but not before we got a lot done. So we ran and we ran and we ran. And I just want to read, I don't want to take much time, but I want to read you something that I think is good, because we have a diverse audience here, and we all have different talents. We all have different ways of looking at things, but we're all Mexican Americans, and we should be, in our own way, working for a goal. So let me read this. An understanding of the role that we all play must also be better developed if we are to reach our goals. Each of us has something to offer, just as each of us has its limitations. The relevance and assessment of each of us lies in our subscription and commitment to a common cause in accordance with our available resources and talent, although we may track on a different plane or march to a different drummer. In the end, let us leave a legacy to future generations, the significance of how we did it, as well as the value of what we did, but more important, that we did it together. Thank you.
And one of the persons with whom Marty did it, to get it done, is here in the audience, and out of respect for him, in recognition for the great work he also did, I would love to have Fernando Del Rio, wherever you are out there, please stand up. And so Theresa Speakes will now tell us how she was able to take this work that Marty Castillo had done to start this organization to help people become business people, to become part of our economic system in our country. Theresa, your turn.
Thank you. I'm very honored and humbled to be here today in the presence of these gentlemen who went before me and who were there. I was not there at that time. But as you said, somebody had to implement it later on down line. So the implementation part is where I came into play. I also want to recognize the fact that we're here to recognize and be a testament to Nixon's legacy on behalf of entrepreneurship. This is what this is all about. And I was doing some research in preparation of my remarks, and I read the Bridges to Dignity speech that he made when he was running for office. When he was running for office, he said, you know, in this country, we have a civil rights commission that concerns itself with the rights, the legal rights, the civil rights of minorities. But we do not have such an institution or such an organization that addresses the economic rights of minorities. If I get elected, when I get elected, I am going to look to do that because it is critical. He also, as been mentioned before, was a very astute politician. He recognized that among that minority group were Hispanics, the fastest growing group in the country. And why? It's been said several times. He was a Californian. I mean, he was raised with them, he knew them. And he recognized that this was going to be a part of this minority component that needed to be assisted. And that is very important because he also made a statement after he was elected that said, you know, everybody has the equal opportunity. We kind of start with a level field of opportunity, but not necessarily a level field of knowledge, of understanding. So it was very important to follow through on this vision that he had, and he did that. In March of 1969, shortly after being elected, he, under executive order, established the Office of Minority Business Enterprise. That gave the authority and the funding that was going to be needed to put in place some programs that were going to assist minorities in their business development. His vision to me, and it's already been said, speaks a lot to the old adage, give a person a fish and you feed him for a day. Teach a man to fish and you feed him for a lifetime. So that really is the important thing about the programs that were initiated that NIDA was able to implement. And as many of you know, or if you don't know, you should know, today Hispanics are the fastest growing group of entrepreneurs in this country. And women, Hispanic women, are even the fastest growing. So I am very proud of that. After establishing OMBI, he then looked, or at the same time, looked to the cabinet committee to assist with many of the things that he wanted to get done. As Martin said, because I talked to him before this, he said, let's get it done. Just do it. I have a mandate. So he got involved, as he mentioned earlier, in helping identify this entity, which ended up being the National Economic Development Association. And working with Ben Fernandez, who, by the way, was the first Hispanic that ran for president in the United States. He is deceased at this time. And with Hillary Sandoval, who was the first Hispanic administrator. And by the way, although I was unable to have my PowerPoint here today, I have a photo of Hillary that says Padrino. So as you all know, he was the godfather. He was the one who provided that seed capital to NIDA when we first got started. He gave us $600,000, which in those days was a lot of money. And we started with 6 offices. And the whole idea of the concept for this organization was that it was going to develop skilled entrepreneurs and professionals. It was going to provide the Hispanic community an opportunity to grow a middle class. It was going to bring talent to bridge the distance between Hispanics, Hispanic community, and the non-Hispanic business community. And the idea was basically to develop a measure of independence and control over the lives of Hispanics through business ownership. Now, that organization was formed through a group of Hispanic businessmen from across the country, Puerto Rico, Florida, New York, New Jersey, California. With us today in the audience, and I'd like him to stand, is Frank Vega. He has been mentioned several times. Frankie actually was a signatory on the Articles of Incorporation for NIDA, along with Ben Fernandez and several other very prominent businessmen. Again, the operation started with $600,000, and it started in LA. We had 6 offices: Los Angeles, New York, Miami, Chicago, Kansas City, and San Antonio. Does that ring a bell by any chance? Highly Hispanic populated communities. Our mission was to go out there and reach those Hispanics in those communities and get them into entrepreneurship. Shortly thereafter, we got a $2.1 million grant from OMBI, and we went to 16 offices. And then we grew to 25 offices. I came into the picture in 1972 when I attended the Nixon convention in Miami. I met the NIDA people, and when I got back to Fresno, I was hired as an administrative assistant. So I was a very low man on the totem pole. I was not the director, I was not a PhD. I was a single mother with 3 kids and a high school education working as a secretary in this organization. Now, I want to say something about NIDA. NIDA was a premier organization. They had all of their professionals had degrees. And the reason they did that is because they didn't want anybody to say that this was just one of these rip-off organizations being funded. No, no, no. These people had degrees from Stanford, Harvard, MBAs. And here I was trying to grow in that organization. So I was going to school full-time, working there, and working my way up. So I ended up in 1970 to 1980, I became the director of the NIDA office in California, working my way with my education to fit in with that NIDA model of a professional. By 1980, NIDA had its 10 years under its belt, and it had really, really assisted a lot of people. I had some reports that you probably all have seen there. This is the 25-year report. I have a 10-year report here and a 20-year report. But in the first 10 years, they had reported over $1.6 billion in 1980 of financial assistance for their clients. Not to speak about all those firms that got certified in the 8A program and got contracts and grants. I mean, really, this organization was really very, very, very powerful and very, very supportive of increasing the businesses in the areas they were at. Not only were they helping businesses, but they were building minority banks, local development corporations, small business investment corporations, and therefore, within the communities they were at, the resources were there for the business people that were trying to get started. In 1980, in December, there was a change in the administration at the national level. There was a movement to decentralization of funding, so the national organization basically collapsed. It folded. We were all left without jobs, without, anything. I was in Fresno. Here I had a VP position at an organization that didn't exist. So I talked to a couple of the ladies in the organization, and I said, you know what? What we do is so important that we need to continue this. So I incorporated my own California nonprofit as a spinoff of NIDA, and we called it NIDA San Joaquin Valley. We started with a small grant in Fresno. We then got the next round of funding from MBDA, which now the Office of Minority Business Enterprise had become the Minority Development Agency. So we got that first grant, started with Fresno, went to Stockton, went to Sacramento, went to Oakland, went to San Francisco, came down to Riverside. We grew the California NIDA. And that agency went from 1981 to 1997. In 1980, when I started my organization, remember the national organization had closed down. Anna Muller, who had been with the Albuquerque, New Mexico operation, and you were there for the opening of that office. I gave Martin his remarks that he made that Anna had sent me, how proud he was to see this organization getting started in New Mexico. Anna is still there today doing the missionary work of working with minority Hispanic businesses, okay? So the legacy goes on. The legacy goes on in that MBDA is out there funding these organizations, and NIDA is out there. In closing, what I want to do is just talk a little tiny bit about not only the successes of the businesses that we help with, and I'm going to focus on one in particular, which is very near and dear to my heart in the Valley, but on the board and staff members. Remember, NIDA was not only developing businesses, but it was developing its people so that we would go on to bigger and better things. We had Phil Sanchez. Many of you know Ambassador Phil Sanchez. He was one of the original board members of NIDA. I tried to get him to come up from Fresno today, but he couldn't make it. But he had 3 appointments from President Nixon. He was the director of the OEO office. He was an ambassador to Colombia and to Honduras. We had Michael Cardenas. Michael Cardenas is a former NIDA board member. He was appointed in a later administration as Small Business Administration Administrator. John Lopez, a former NIDA employee, became a McDonald's franchisee. And let me tell you, that man, I don't know how many McDonald's he had, and he is right now a major supplier for McDonald International. And of course, me, simple little me. As I mentioned, I was a single parent with a high school education. I started as the administrative assistant. I went on to be appointed by Governor Duke Mason, Governor Wilson, President Bush 41, and President Bush 43. So the legacy that Nixon gave us of striving out to do and grow is still alive and well. Finally, the client. Fred and Luis Ruiz started their little mom and pop Mexican food products in Tulare County back in 1979. They came to NIDA in the early 80s. We got them their loan to build their first fabulous, plant, because they had been operating at an old, like a turkey ranch house or something. And the USDA had come and said, no, 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 you can't be there. You have to have a sanitary facility. So they bought this beautiful building with an LDC, through the LDC, the Tulare Local Development Corporation 504 loan. Today, they have 2,600 employees. They are the first among the top 10 U.S. Hispanic-owned manufacturing firms in California. They are first among the top 500 Hispanic-owned manufacturers in the United States. They are 6th among the top Hispanic-owned firms in the United States. In addition to being successful in business, by the way, Luis has passed away, but Fred has been very active in his community. He is a board regent for the University of California California Systems. He was awarded he was inducted into the Hall of Fame by SBA in 1992, and he has donated over $1 million to the Central California Children's Hospital, and their Ruiz for Kids nonprofit has donated nearly $1 million to children-based community nonprofits. I rest my case about the Nixon legacy with the Hispanic business community.
And the story continues, of which the world has yet to learn more. In the Oval Office, he and I had a long discussion about many things that had to be done. And Justice Marty had worked with the president way back in 1969 when the Census Bureau told the president, sorry, we can't count the Mexican Americans because all the forms have been printed and there's nothing we can do. Well, at the urging of Marty, the president told them, destroy those, print brand new ones, and include the counting of the Mexican Americans and the Spanish-speaking people. With that knowledge of the numbers, a lot of things could be done and were done. And so when I came out of the Oval Office and went to our offices of the Cabinet Committee, I called Manny, wonderful man, who also spent most of his youth from kindergarten to high school. I think high school, I'm not sure, in about 27, 37 schools throughout the country. He was a full-time migrant. And after he came out of the Marine Corps, he decided at age 20-some to go to the 9th grade to get his high school diploma. But the counselor told him, no, you go straight to college. So I came and I told Manny, I want you to do 3 things. The president has already approved it. 1, we're going to take the federal government to where the people live. 2, we're going to count in all of the federal government, the Army, the Navy, all the agencies, how many Spanish-speaking persons there are there, and how much money goes out to the Spanish-speaking people. Pretty big job. But Manny Oliverez will tell us the story of what he did. Manuel?
My legs aren't working.
He's 82 years old, but look at him.
Hey.
82 years young. Remember that. First, I want to express my deep heart appreciation to my great storyteller over there, Martin Castillo, who tells a beautiful story. He's a great storyteller. And to Dr. Ramirez for giving me the opportunity to serve in the Cabinet Committee for 5 years. I was recruited out of Sacramento. I was at a conference in Sacramento. Hank Quevedo called me over there, called me to the side, and we were having a statewide Chicano conference in Sacramento during that year. And Hank Quevedo called me over and said, you want to go to Washington? I said, what am I going to do in Washington? He said, well, the only thing I asked him was, will I continue to serve my community if I go to Washington, D.C.? That's the only ask. I didn't ask for grade level. I didn't ask for how much I was going to get paid. Nothing. I should have asked who's going to take all my furniture and stuff, but I didn't. So I had to pay for it when I went. And I've been, well, I was new. I didn't know the game. And he said, yes, we have been told that we can continue to serve the Hispanic community, so you don't have to worry about that. I said, well, count me in. That was probably April of '69. Then I waited and waited for the phone call from him to say, hop a plane and fly in. On a Sunday, I think it was June 2nd of '69, I hopped the red-eye special out of San Francisco, because I'm from Monterey, California, now living out of Orlando. And I hopped the red-eye special out of San Francisco, arrived there at 6:30, went to the old executive office building. There was one guy sitting with a bunch of chairs, and I was the first one there. And you have no idea how scared you get when you're sitting there and you're now working for the government of the United States, and you don't know what the heck to do. The United States of America, 300 million, 50 states, and you're sitting there and you don't know, what am I supposed to do? Well, it doesn't take very long before the system gives you, you hack onto the system and it rolls along and you're okay. But I still remember that 41 years ago, it's 41 years, I still remember that feeling in my pit of my stomach that, what am I doing here? But then it became a lot of fun. And as I just want to comment on one thing that on NITA, I happened to be accompany my leaders to SBA when they sat down with Hilario Sandoval and signed the first contract. So I was fly on the wall on all these things that happened. But one of the things that isn't mentioned is that Fernandez, also as being chairman of NITA, he was the first chairman of NITA, he also was a precursor of getting us started on savings and loans. He was hot on savings and loans. That's when I found out if you got a board together, got a couple $100,000, you can put a savings and loan together. And so he went around the country putting savings and loans together. My brother Pete Oliverez, who's está con Dios ahorita, he was entrepreneur and he worked with Ben Fernandez in that particular. So I just want to share that isn't too common knowledge that we, with NITA, also had a strong drive on creating savings and loans by Hispanics for everybody. Anybody wanted a house or a building, you can say savings and loans are for Hispanics, run by savings and loans. Hopefully the profits are for Hispanics, but the loans are for anybody who went. Now, the chairman says, Manny, I want you to talk about what you did at the Cabinet Committee. I was director for program operations. That's why I was a fly on the wall in most of these programs. And I'm going to talk about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 things. Federal regions, agency task forces, 16-point program, team, and top-level support. If you're taking notes, those are my 5 topics, and I'll go through them pretty fast. There were 10 regions officed during that time that we were, this is 1970 to 70, I left in 73 to go to the Air Force. We had 10 regions, and I was instructed to put together a team to go to 6 regions, and they were San Francisco, Denver, Dallas, Chicago, New York, and Kansas City. And we put the teams together, chaired by Dr. Ramirez, and we asked we had 2 questionnaires we gave them. One questionnaire had to do with personnel, that is, your representation and utilization of Hispanics in policymaking and grant-giving jobs. How many do you have? Where do you have them? How do you recruit them? And second is contracts and grants. Just 2 big things, contracts and grants. How much money you got, and are you giving it to Hispanic Americans? Let's make sure you give it to qualified Hispanic Americans. Got to be able to do the job. But those were the 2 things, and we flew all over the country. The team of 6, about 10 people in the team, under the chairmanship of Dr. Ramirez, and we hit these 6 regions. And it had never been done before, so I think we were kind of creating a path that has been followed by many others since then. A follow-on to that was the agency task forces, which that was in the regions. Now we did the same thing in Washington, D.C. And Mr. Garcia was one of the many team members who was given a region, an agency or 2 agencies to develop a strategic plan to deal with recruitment of Hispanics or the utilization, the recruitment and utilization of Hispanics in the federal agencies, and also contracts and grants. The same thing we were doing in the regions, we were trying to do in Washington, D.C., our team. Now, be honest with you, we were full of ambition, we were full of dreams, we were full of hope, we were full of ourselves, I guess, because as I've been doing this business since '69, I still do it. I'm retired, but I still do it. And I have come to understand that we were like Don Quixote with the windmills, because there is a myriad of regulations and attitudes in the system that make progress almost impossible. Make it almost impossible. But the beauty of us is that we were so ignorant that we didn't know that. So, como Don Quixote, andamos peleando con los windmills. Pero teníamos unos sueños, les voy a decir. Y después de 41 años, esos sueños siguen. Siguen como tan fuertes como entonces. En que estamos más viejitos, ya no podemos brincar y correr, y se nos olvidan las cosas a veces, pero el corazón es tan fuerte como entonces. El cuerpecito está más viejito, pero el corazón sigue como siempre. Y por eso digo yo, as I look back now that I've been doing it so many years, I have no regrets of what we did, Gigi, when we took on the system like we did. But we took it on with faith, and we took it on with hope, and we felt that every day we would be able to make a difference. And I think the two things have remained since then. One is what Martin Castillo spoke a minute ago about the census. The census continues to count us and keeps increasing in terms of the complexity of the questions they ask about us when we go out for enumeration. That data then is used to program. And so there's more opportunity for us because of that census. So the census, the Cabinet Committee and the census, what it did for the census, is the biggest thing that ever did for Hispanics. Everything else is kind of, all these little programs that I was involved in, they had a shelf life, but not the census. The second thing that has continued is the 16-point program. The 16-point program, the Hispanic Employment Program, the Spanish-speaking program, whatever you want to call it. The reason that it's one of the big ones is because it still continues to make the agencies aware of Hispanic Americans and the need to do something about it, to recruit them, to train them, to promote them, to provide opportunities for them. Now, does the system do it the way we would like it to and expect it? No, I'll be honest with you. It doesn't. But that doesn't mean that it won't. That doesn't mean that we quit. That doesn't mean that we stop. We continue to push. I've been doing that for 41 years. I will continue hasta que Dios diga ya es tiempo que vengas conmigo, and I won't stop. Because my hope still remains that what we started in the Cabinet Committee way back in '69, that it'll be, you never lose hope, como Don Quixote. You keep on rolling. And quizás podemos, those who follow us, like Theresa followed us, and others will follow Theresa, the young people who are in the colleges and universities now, they'll follow us, and what we've said and shared with them today will make a difference. And they will create that change that creates a playing level field for everyone. As Gigi said, Hispanos, Mexicanos, o Hispanos, voy a decir de todo, porque somos, we're a family. We're a family, a Hispanic family. We don't ask for anything. I never ask for it. I don't ask for privileges. I don't ask for exceptional effort. I just want an even break. I just want an even break for my people. I just want them, if they're qualified, if they're educated, if they're willing to work, if they can do the job, then give them an opportunity to do the job. And that's all. That's all I've ever asked for myself. That's all Theresa told you the life story, starting from a clerk to be a state director and put together an entrepreneurial sense. That's something that almost every one of us has internally. But regretfully, there are some conditions that don't enhance that or don't let it flower the way it should. I don't point fingers at anything. I just say that's the way, the ambiente that we live in, that impacts upon our opportunities to improve our condition in our great country. One of the things that I was very proud in the committee was the people I work with, like Gigi and Fernando del Rio, que está allí, you know, he was our administrator. Ray Carrasco from Sacramento out of El Paso, Mr. Conde, Alejandro Becerra from El Paso, and Carlos Ruiz, que ya fue con Dios, but he was these were all tremendous, many others. These are the ones that I remember. They were tremendous individuals with hope and ambition and a drive to improve opportunities for Hispanic, a great team. And finally, I think what made the job so enjoyable, not only the opportunity to serve our community and the expectations that we could make a difference, was that I and Gigi and the rest of us always knew that Dr. Ramirez was right behind us, that if anybody called up and said, you know, fire those son of a guns, he said, why? They're doing their job, which means we had top-level support. When you have top-level support, you can stand out and take on the system. But if you don't have top-level support, you better be careful because you can lose your job. We always had top-level support. I could always count on Dr. Ramirez to protect us, to be our buffer that would let us continue to do our job. And so I give great thanks to these two men, one for bringing me on board, Martin Castillo, in '69, and to Dr. Ramirez, who gave me the effort, the opportunities to do all the programs and work and serve my community, serve my people, serve my country. I think the biggest thing is to serve my country. Country's been great. My mom never went to school. My dad only went to the second grade. I went to grammar school, never went to high school. Thankfully, in California, if you go to junior college, you can cut it. They let you stay. It took me 3 years to do high school. And then I went to the university. Then I went to Antioch, got my master's. Then I went to Harvard and for executive leadership. So in this country, you know, it's up to you. I'm so proud of being an American and the great opportunities it gives us. For a migrant farm worker, you know, with no education at all, to be able to serve the President of the United States, can you imagine? When I think about it, I get goosebumps. It's really something to know that in this beautiful, great country of ours, a migrant farm worker can do that. And I leave you with that. I just want to share that sense of great pride I have in this beautiful flag that I wear on my lapel. Thanks.
You see, Stu Spencer, what you started? And so this man, Richard Nixon, with all the firsts, you just heard a little bit today. One day in the Oval Office, I said, you know, we don't have a single Mexican-American general. He said, well, damn it, go make one. The man wound up with 4 stars eventually. General Cavazos. One time I told him, you know, our culture is such that we love God, we're God-fearing, and culture is defined by a person's relationship to God. So I said, you have White House Sunday service here all the time. I'd like to have an archbishop say Mass here. He said, well, do it. And so we invited Frankie Vega and 499 more Mexicans to come to the White House for a Sunday service. First time. I wrote him a memo and said, I'd like to have this country recognize our heritage so he proclaimed National Hispanic Heritage Week. UCLA gives credit to Lyndon Johnson for that, but it was President Nixon. It's just on and on. And so in Spanish we have a word, it's called informador, the one who informs. And so if people don't know about all these things, it's Carlos Conde's fault because that was his job. So Carlos, would you let us know what you did at the White House?
Thank you, Henry. I didn't hear anything you said. I'm the last one on the program, and I feel everything has been said. And, I feel like the guy who thought nobody was paying any attention to him, so when he died, he had on his tombstone, "I told you I was sick." And this is so I'm going to be short because everything has been said very eloquently by my colleagues. He's been recognized before, but I'd like to wake him up again and recognize him once more. Fernando de Leo, you're one of us, and you should be up here, Fernando, because you made some great contributions to the early Hispanic movement in the U.S. So I always think of you in that regard. I'll tell you how I got to Washington for the second time, because I was a Washington correspondent early in my career. And then I went to Latin America as a correspondent, again as a foreign correspondent. And then I came to Houston, Texas, to work for the Houston Chronicle. And I wrote a 5-piece article called The Hyphenated Americans. And it was nominated for a Pulitzer Prize, which I didn't win. I won other prizes, but I didn't win that one. But it got a lot of play and a lot of publicity. And George H.W. Bush was a congressman from Houston. And so I got to know him by covering some of his stories, and or when he came and doing some of the stories on him. And so one day, after President Nixon had won the presidency, he called me and he said, "Would you like to come to Washington to work for President Nixon on Hispanic affairs?" And he explained to me what I would be doing, or he thought I would be doing. Excuse me, I thought I would be doing. So I said, "It sounds interesting." He said, "Well, let me put the person on the line who is heading that committee." And he put Martin Castillo on the line, and Martin explained to me what I would be doing for the cabinet committee, what he wanted me to do, and I accepted and went, and it was one of the most interesting experiences that I had in my life. Although I'm still a journalist, and this is for what has been for most of my life, my profession, I went to Washington to try to develop a program that the people in the U.S. could understand about the Hispanic Americans. And at that time, when I was going from Texas to Washington, although I had been in Washington as a correspondent, Spanish speaking sounded a little bit pretentious. And it sounded pretentious because I came from Texas, and I was a regional Latino. And I've always thought, that there were Mexican Americans. California was a long way from Texas, and the few that I knew, they always came back saying they were from Pasadena or places I've never heard of. So it didn't register to me. So why Spanish speaking? And so this was because they wanted to start including the Puerto Ricans, who at that time didn't register with the large Mexican American community. And at that time, as you recall, the Cubans were just coming in to the country after Castro takeover. So they weren't, in a way, computing with us. It was hard to accept them. There was Mexican Americans probably constituted about 3/4 or more, maybe 80% of the population at that time. So it was a job, and the president wanted to include everyone. And so we undertook that with the leadership of Martin and then Henry. And I did some work, which I guess they thought was good enough, and then they asked me to go to the White House. And so I went to the White House as the first Spanish-speaking, or the first Mexican-American. And for a while, I guess a lot of people thought that I was one of the Filipino waiters because I looked something like them. So I went to the White House, and I was the first one there to undertake some of the programs. Working under Herb Klein, by the way, was the director of, not the director, but they call him counselor, communications counselor. And it was a daunting, not problem, but a challenge, because again, there were 3/4 of the people were Mexican Americans in the U.S. The Cubans didn't even get to be 1 million, and the Puerto Ricans were, in a way, isolated. So we had to find a way to bring them in. And Martin, to his credit, did very good work in trying to integrate all the communities. My challenge was trying to not educate, but to inform, I guess, if a better word, the press, the media about Latinos. For a while, everybody wanted to call us Chicanos, and of course, Chicanos played bigger in the Southwest. Didn't have any meaning at all to Puerto Ricans in New York, and the Cuban Americans could care less about what the Mexican American problems were, because they did not have the same problems we did. So how do we coalesce all of them? Well, by and by, again with Martin's leadership and then Henry's, we were able to put together a program all inclusive, but we had another problem, and that was the problem of the Mexican Americans in the Southwest. La Raza Unida and Chicanos and all were always struggling with those problems, and because we called ourselves a Spanish-speaking committee, they thought we were, again, the word that I use for pretentious. So we were always trying to struggle with a common unity. And I remember Martin was with us. Henry was still not the chairman, but I organized a meeting in Houston. And so it took me a long time. And so Tacho Mendiola, who's from Houston, and he's now one of the one of the academic leaders at the University of Houston. So we set it up very well, and tables and plenty of people, and right in the middle of the program, here comes Tacho with all his gang, and boy, there was a brawl. And so that was one of my probably most important experiences that we had, but it got better, and then we went to New York, and it was easier with the Boricuas, with the Puerto Ricans, and the Cuban Americans by that time were beginning to establish, their own communities here, and so it wasn't hard for the Cubans, but it was difficult for us with the Mexican Americans. For one thing, most of them were Democrats, diehard Democrats, and they didn't want to accept or understand that President Nixon wanted to be an all-inclusive president, and there were always issues that were coming up that we could not, in a way, confront successfully. You know, like education programs and so forth. But little by little, and then with the help of all the Latinos who were now coming into government, and all the agencies, that began to change because of them. And we had one strategy which I tried to promote. And I say it worked, and it's still working, but what we were trying to do is not, and they can, Henry and Martin and the rest of my colleagues can speak better to that, but what we were trying to do, and what I was trying to do as my job, was to promote the fact that we were going after the mid-level jobs in government. Because at that time, if you will recall history, Johnson did not have very many appointees. Kennedy did not have very many, hardly any appointees. So, and we were realistic enough to know that we were not going to get any cabinet jobs at that time. So what we said is, let's go for the mid-level jobs. And then we'll put our own people in there. And those are the ones who make the decisions, as Manny pointed out. These are the ones who control who gets hired, how are you going to divide up the money and so forth. And I think we were successful because later on we made a list and we had about, 60, Henry? Or 80 appointees? How many? Okay, so we went in that direction, and then we felt that things would get better. After I went to the White House, and I will end with this, after I went to the White House, it wasn't difficult for me to try and advance these programs, but there was also many times when the White House, because of the way it was made up, would not pay too much attention to us. You know, we really had to work to develop a program where it was all inclusive. It was not the president via Nixon, it was more the mindset of those who had come with Nixon. And it was difficult for them, I guess, to accept the Latino and appreciate what it was trying to do and what it was trying to accomplish. But little by little, like everything else, we did it. And take a look now at the White House. I was the first one a long time ago, I grant you, but now there's counselors to the president, special advisors. So it's become now just something that's routine to have Latinos. But 45 years ago, I guess, I was the first one. And I have I still have my check of when I testified at the Watergate grand jury. I never cashed it, and I think Henry was one. Who else was? But to me, I guess it was sort of a, if you can call it a badge, or but maybe I wouldn't want to go to that far and be that extreme. But it was an accomplishment of. It was a sign of accomplishment. You know, that the fact that they thought I had been involved enough to be cited by the, not to be cited, to be indicted, not indicted either, but I should have, but to be subpoenaed, that's the word, subpoenaed by the grand jury. And when I told him what I was doing, I guess they accepted it, and here I am. But I'd like to close just by saying how much I appreciate the people who put this together and gave us the opportunity to talk to you. And I, for one, did not think, you know, that there was still that type of appreciation or for the work that was done by what I call the pioneering group in Washington. And these are the people that you see here. And I'm glad to have been just a little bit, made a few contributions to it. So I thank Martin, just my first boss, for his leadership, and I thank Henry, who continued the job. Thank you very much.
And now, as a finale, I think you are writing questions, some of you, and I think they're going to bring them up to me. But as they bring them up, I would like to add a few little tidbits. First one is that I have finished writing a book about that time, and it has a possible title, not for sure, of The Nixon No One Knew. For many reasons. The story you heard today is not something, it's a good one, but not something other people in New York Times, CBS, NBC, etc., want the world to know. And Watergate brought an end to the Cabinet Committee, and it's sad. I recall when Herbert Hoover had assigned an FBI agent to be my liaison, and he would always check my travels to make sure that there would be no problems. And one time this agent came to me and he said, let's go for a ride. Went to Virginia, into the woods, where he kept looking around. And when he saw that no one had followed us, he said to me, I have applied for a transfer out of Washington because I will not get caught between giants. They'll squash me. I just came out of the office of the counselor, the lawyer to the president, the man who's there in the White House to advise the president, the counsel for legal affairs. His name is John Dean. And I went there yesterday, right after the break-in, because we knew that he was the person that knew about the people who did the break-in. At that day, the president, Ehrlichman, and Haldeman were out of Washington. So he went to his office, and John Dean said, I'm too busy right now, but come back tomorrow. So he went back the next day, and John Dean says, there's all those three boxes in the corner there. Anything you want is right there. So the man told him, he says, you know what? You've already obstructed justice. He folded up his briefcase and said, I'm leaving you now. And that's when he came to me and said, this thing's bad. That man knows a lot. And you know, now he's parading himself as a person that didn't know anything. That's in my book. And many other things like that. So we thank this man who occupies a very big place in history. I have some questions here. This is the good one. What is your fondest memory of Richard Nixon? Being in that Oval Office where when he says to me, you know, I eat enchiladas, I eat tacos, I ride horses. I go to 16th of September parades. I wear hats, I wear sombreros. I try to get that Mexican vote, but all I ever get is 5%. And so he said, this time, I want you to help me get 15%. And I reached into my shirt pocket, and I pulled out a 3.5 by 5 card. And I said, Mr. President, I suggest if you do these 5 things, you'll get 25%. Well, he laughed, twirled around in his chair, and used interesting language. He said, you know, you're not just a Latin teacher. I'm the politician. And you're telling me you're going to get 25% but if I do these things? I said, yes, read them well. So he did. He said, Haldeman, get in here. Dr. Ramirez says, I'll get 25 if we do these things. Let's do it. Let's do it. One of them, of course, was we got to bring in 100 Mexican Americans at very high level positions. And of course, we worked at it. We got 76. And there were 4 other things, but that's on my book. That was the fondest memory. Mm-hmm. How much time do we have? Jonathan? One more question. Let's see. Before the U.S. Census counted Mexican Americans, how did the U.S. government meet the needs of its Latino population? Well, one time I called the Pentagon and I said, you are advertising to get recruits into the armed services. Oh yes, we advertise all over the place for minority recruits. It says, well, how much money do you spend on Spanish TV, Spanish radio, Spanish newspapers? And he said, we don't have to go there. We do that in LA Times, New York Times, ABC, CBS, because they're Caucasians, they're white people. All the money went into black media. Things like that. We didn't count. That's the answer. Jonathan, we're finished.
Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you've enjoyed this panel presentation. Thanks to each and every one of you for participating, both you as an audience and you as participants, to show our gratitude. And we historically have had many panels like this and major speakers, and I know why you come. You don't come for the lavish honorariums. You come for the gifts that we give you. And today is no exception because we're presenting each one of you with a beautiful, limited edition, limited to the number we can sell, mug, What Would Nixon Do? I should have had special ones made for you of what did Nixon do, because you have answered that question in terms of the historic initiatives, the vision that he and you expressed on behalf of Spanish-speaking people. And thank you for building a record that we will have online within just a few days. Thank you for coming. I hope all of you enjoyed it. Please come back.